Okay, so thank you everyone for being here. Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you that are joining us today for this incredible step in our project. I'm Margaitan. I'm the coordinator of the Towched project, and I welcome everyone for being here. I'm absolutely thrilled to see everyone here and to share what marks for this project a huge milestone for all. We are here today with two powerful kits that are one of our main results, two of our main results of the project that are going hopefully to completely transform the way we approach cultural heritage and engage with the next generation. So this is the event that officially marks an invitation to move beyond theory and step directly into action. So today we are here and we are going to hear about the Towched, a human rights-based approach toolbox that will explore how to move away from traditional top-down models and foster true equitable partnerships with communities. And on the other hand, we will have the Towched kit of creative resources that will discover innovative hands-on materials designed to turn your museums, your heritage sites into a lab for youth and children action. So welcome everyone, and especially a huge thanks to our panel. We have Martina Gastaldello and Henry McGee, who are senior consultants of ECROM, and also Lucas Tello, who is on behalf of CIMOS 98, both partners of this amazing project. So thank you our panelists for bringing your expertise, your passion, and your energy, especially in a Monday. Let's hear about you. So I give the floor to, I think it was Martina. First, so the floor is yours. Thank you, everyone. And I please ask everyone to put your mic in silence and also to turn off your camera. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mahar. I'll go first to introduce our part. Colleague Martina Gastaldello. We work with ICROM, as you mentioned, which is an intergovernmental organization supporting member states with education and training around culture, conservation and heritage. But today we're talking about the Human Rights-Based Approach Toolkit, which we've developed as part of the Towched project. So this is the cover of it. It's actually got a longer title, which is quite long, but because there's quite a lot in there. Applying rights-based approach to collections-based education for sustainable development. And although it is quite a long title, the toolkit is a practical tool. As Mara says, it's not just about concepts and ideas. It's about helping us direct ourselves, our work, and our institutions to supporting these aspects. So if we look firstly at the toolkit for, it's aimed at anyone who develops education and learning activities using heritage collections. And that might include museum, library, or archive educators in the broadest sense, exhibition makers, curators, and educators of all kinds. And we often think of education as including like what's referred to as formal education, schools, colleges, and universities, non-formal education, more like training, and informal education, which is lifelong learning and community-based education. And we just show a page from the toolkit here on the right-hand side to try to get across that we try to make it look really, really nice, to try to make it look easy to use, because we want people to use it. So believe that educators in all their diversity, in all their settings, can make use of heritage collections to support education and education for sustainable development. And if we can think, well, how can we use this toolkit? If you are one of these educators in whatever form that might be, you might use the toolkit as a kind of start to finish, as a whole process from before you develop a program to doing it, monitoring and evaluating it, and communicating it afterwards. Or you might use it as a reference tool to dip into if you're facing a particular challenge or a situation in your work, an opportunity. You think, oh, I could just do with a bit more support with this stage. This is what the toolkit also tries to help you to do. So it includes a lot of information, guiding questions that are intended to be very practical, key actions for you to take, interactive pages, and what we call in-practice examples. And you can see one of the illustrations to the right-hand side is of one of the characters we have in the toolkit to try to help people see themselves in this toolkit. That people who face the same challenges as you do, they can do these things. And you can use the toolkit on a computer as an interactive PDF, or you might print out pages of particular interest. You might work on them on your own, or you might work on them with your colleagues together. So we can say that the toolkit brings together some different considerations. Children and youth in all their diversity, not only meaning that it's school pupils, but in their lifelong learning, their community education. Secondly, we have human rights and the human rights-based approach. The third bit is education for sustainable development, which is part of the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And the fourth part is heritage collections, as really as multifunctional resources for education, learning, creativity, and communication. So here's just a page from the toolkit to try to show you that we've tried to lay it out in a really practical way. So when we work with the human rights-based approach, we look at the situation. Who is able to access collections-based education for sustainable development? What might the barriers be? What might be the actions that would help us overcome those barriers? Then we look at how can we plan our activity. We look at, well, how can we make concrete steps that are focused, that strengthen people's ability to claim their right to education and learning, and that empowers staff to be more effective in this work. In the third part, we're in the implementation stage. We're doing the work. But in this stage, it's important to make sure that we don't accidentally introduce discriminatory practices, and the toolkit helps you to do this. And the fourth part is communicating the impact. Because it's not enough to do the work, we also need to tell the story. This helps to empower the institutions, the learners, and it helps more of society understand the potential of museums, libraries and archives, collections, and people and communities to be part of sustainable development. So here we have just some pages from an earlier toolkit, just to try to help you to see that, we look at, well, what is the step or what is the challenge? We might look at identifying capacity gaps. What skills, knowledge, or motivation might staff need to develop? Then we have, on the right-hand side, we have like an interactive page where you can choose, what best describes your institution or your work or your personal work, and what actions might need to be taken to strengthen that. The guide also helps readers to understand collections-based education and how that relates to the Sustainable Development Goals. So, of course, there are 17 goals. One of them is quality education and lifelong learning. But education is much more than that. It's much more than one goal or a single target. There is a very specific target 4.7, on education for sustainable development and global citizenship. But it's really a catalyst or an enabler for all of the SDGs, all of the targets. And we think of SDG 4.7 typically as including 8 key themes: cultural diversity and tolerance, gender equality, human rights, peace and nonviolence, climate change, environmental sustainability, sustainable consumption and production, and human survival and well-being. And these key themes are very important because, of course, countries around the world have all signed up to the SDGs and to their targets. So if we can connect our work with these themes, whether it's our existing work or to refocus our work, it helps us to play a really distinctive part in this agenda. There is, of course, a huge amount already happening, but it's really a bit unrealized, underappreciated. The work is happening, but cultural institutions often don't report it or don't have the opportunities to report it. So I'll give you an example. So here's the theme of gender equality. And I picked this one out because people often think that education for sustainable development is about natural resources, climate change. That is part of it, of course, but is not all of it. Education for sustainable development also covers social and justice and peace-related themes. So from this page in the toolkit, it gives us a very high-level kind of definition or overview of gender equality, this one taken from UNESCO. We can have some examples of learning content that we could use for collections-based education. And if we move to the next page, we can think about, well, what are the relevant SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and what kind of collections might we use to address these? We might think of them in terms of gender representation in society, about the history of women and girls' participation in society, about the fight for the right to vote, about access and unequal access to healthcare, about access to cultural and other forms of property that we could explore through legal collections, about representations in artworks, and which artists are represented in collections, about how gender stereotypes are built partly through objects we might find in collections like children's toys, or through the what is considered to be acceptable employment for different people. So we can see many ways for collections to be used that can address education for development. We also have nice walkthroughs for people who have that we made these up, but people who face particular challenges. How could we do this? How could we use the toolkit in a start to finish way? And also, I mentioned it's really important that we monitor and evaluate our work so that we can communicate the difference that it made. So it's really important that we set goals at the start, that we monitor and evaluate those, and we communicate our successes and challenges at the end. And we give you some suggestions for this. And then I'll pass now to my colleague, Martina, who will take us through a deep dive, take us through inclusive and accessible learning. Thank you. So I'll stop my share.
Thank you, Harry. Let me share my screen. Okay. Second. Okay. Okay, so the next part is going to be a deep dive on inclusive and accessible learning. This is really one of the key part and one of the key elements of our toolbox, and we're very proud of it because inclusivity and accessibilities are really concepts that are at the core of human rights, and so we wanted to dedicate a lot of time, a lot of space to it, to really support collections-based organizations to tailor their educational activities based on the different groups and based on the different needs. So as you can see, we have dedicated a part on ensuring accessible and inclusive learning on the stage 2 of the toolkit, and in particular at step 2. But I need to say something important. This stage 2 is about planning. So here we're really giving the foundations of planning an activity and giving shape to your activity if you are a collection-based organization. But of course, whatever you do in the planning stage, then you should bring it in the implementation stage, so at stage 3. And in fact, at stage 3, we have included a step on non-discriminatory practices that also sort of recalls what we said before at step 2. So inclusivity and accessibility, we have chosen these two particular words because they are really at the core of a human rights-based approach. And because the fundamental truth and principle in human rights is that human rights should be for all individuals. So regardless of the personal characteristics, gender, age, disability, ethnicity, social status, religion, everyone should be entitled to enjoy the same set of rights, and they should not be excluded. So, of course, here we are we're talking about collections-based educational activities. This is our scenario, but what we want to promote is this idea that children and youth, that are the particular target of this toolkit, should be able to participate in this activity in conditions of equality. Irrespective of his personal characteristics. And this really connects to the principle of participation and the principle of non-discrimination that are two of the pillars of the human rights-based approach. So let's start with accessibility. Accessibility is very important, and there is a framework that is used in international human rights law. And this is the framework where we can situate the word accessibility and this important concept. And it's basically the triple AQ framework. So when we think about a human right, it can really be any right, but in this case, let's consider the right of education. The triple AQ framework means that there should be availability of this right, there should be accessibility, there should be cultural appropriateness, and then there should be quality. So this is the triple AQ framework. Now here, let's focus on the word accessibility, and let's take as an example an educational activity that is being organized by a museum or by a library or any collections-based organization. And that is made through heritage collections. So how can a museum or any collection-based organization actually respect and promote this principle of accessibility? In different ways, because as you can see in this slide, accessibility has 4 dimensions: a physical dimension, an economic dimension, a communication or information dimension, and then non-discrimination. So what does it mean in practice? Physical accessibility. Let's imagine that the museum organizes an activity in the museum itself or in a school to an educational activity to promote sustainable development using collections. Physical accessibility in this case would mean to take into account the specific requirements of all the participating groups. For example, maybe there is a group of children and youth that live in a rural area. Do they have the means to reach the activity? Is there a bus service to bring them to the museums? Or there are some children who have a physical impairment, they have a disability. In this case, they may need also maybe access with a wheelchair, they may need a ramp or an elevator. So is there adequate transportation, but also adequacy of the building in terms of structure to ensure the physical accessibility of particular groups? Economic accessibility, this sort of equals with affordability in the sense that, of course, when we talk about lifelong learning and education for sustainable development, there is a different set of obligation in international law compared, for example, to primary education that should be free and free for all. But still, lifelong learning should be a right for all children. So the fact of belonging to a group of children maybe living in poverty and the fact of not having the economic means should not be an excuse for not be able to participate. So this is also important in terms of looking around, like at which groups there are in the community and considering, is there anyone that potentially could be excluded? Is the activity for free? Are we asking for a fee? And keep this element in mind. Then if we look at the communication and information, accessibility, here we can consider, for example, children who are blind or have any visual impairment, but also children who are deaf. Or maybe if there are like indigenous people or other minorities in the community, does the museum offer the information also in a minority language? For example, sign language is recognized as a minority language. Or is there the information in Braille? So, for example, if a blind child needs to read the tag close to a sculpture or a painting, they can still do that. So, of course, this is something that requires financial availability, because often maybe museums have a scarcity of resources, but in the toolkit, we also provide some ways of doing so, for example, in partnership with some local organizations that work with people with disability, or maybe some volunteers. So the idea is to try to be creative to really ensure that even if a child has disability, they are not discriminating, and they're still able to enjoy art and to enjoy education for sustainable development. And then the non-discrimination. So here the idea is to really first to identify like any potential barrier, and then to try to reduce and progressively eliminate any existing barrier to education and to lifelong learning. So here we can see how it looks like in the toolkit, specifically step 2 on ensuring accessible and inclusive learning. Here basically the starting point is, if you are a collection-based organization and you need to start designing and shaping an educational activity, think about who will take part, again, through a mapping that you did before on who are the different groups in the community. And see what barriers there could be that cause the lack of accessibility to lifelong learning. Here you can see a list of barriers, like can be the age, gender, sexual orientation, disability, migration status, and so on. And then basically, what is important is that collection-based organization try really to identify and remove any barriers to learning, to be safe and welcoming spaces. And this we will see later passes through, for example, using an inclusive language and have staff training or a lot of like inclusive practices. And tailor the activities to the specific group. Of course, this requires a lot of planning and resources, but this is precisely what the kit wants to help with. We have provided extensive guidance in the toolkit on how to design inclusive activities for these 4 groups of children and youth: persons with disabilities, members of ethnic and or linguistic minorities, then a category that includes all the displaced persons, so can be refugees, asylum seekers, stateless persons, internally displaced persons, or migrants. And then a 4th category is on women and girls, and LGBTI plus persons. What we did is that for each group, so each section mirror each other, and basically for each group, you can find an overview of these 4 aspects plus dedicated resources. You will find the link to the resources. The international standards that are relevant to these specific groups, human rights compliant terminology that you can use to communicate with the group, but also about the group, a guidance on collecting data on personal characteristics, and then a list of dedicated inclusive practices. So I want to look at this session by making an example. And specifically, the example is about children and youth with disabilities. So you can also see what it looks like in the toolkit. We start with the main international standard. This is really the normative framework of reference that you can use. And it's very interesting because it's really the most authoritative guidance at the international level. So, for example, in the case of disability, we have the UN Convention on the Right of Persons with Disability. And then the committee. The committee is basically a treaty body associated to the convention. And basically, the committee adopts some interpretation of the provisions of the treaty of specific articles. So there is, for example, General Comment 2 is dedicated to accessibility, and you can find a lot of like extensive information on how you can design accessible activities for all the spectrum of disabilities. And then we also have another good source is the UN Special Rapporteurs on the right of persons with disabilities. And for all the groups of children and youth, the UN Convention on the Right of the Child is also the most recognized source because it also has general comments on all the different groups of children. Then human rights compliant terminology, this is also something we consider very important because in a society, inclusivity starts from the way we speak about people. So through the language, we really have a chance to promote inclusivity, to promote acceptance, and to fight the stereotypes that exist in society. And one of the stereotypes is against people with disabilities. And the idea is really to use an inclusive language. For example, in the case of people with disability, we'll see we promote the use of people first language. What does it mean? It means that we say person with disability, we don't say disabled person because we put the people at the center. And so we refer to the person before we refer to the disability. So this human rights compliant terminology guide includes all these do's and don'ts and the good etiquette to really communicate with this group of people, and you will find the same guidance for each of the four group of the toolkit. Then we also have a part on data collection. So this is also something very important because if you are a collection-based organization and you organize an educational activity, we really recommend to collect and analyze data on who are the participants. So usually there are attendance lists, but in addition to the name and the surname, it's really important to show who are the participating group. Are they children with disabilities? Are they belonging to a specific minorities? And there are ways, like safe ways to do that per each of the group. So in the case of children with disabilities, I think a lot of people don't know that we are not supposed to ask somebody, do you have a disability? This is not the correct way to ask. But we need to use Washington Group short set of questions. It's an internationally recognized tool, also internationally agreed, and it allows to basically ask questions on 6 functional domains that are vision, hearing, mobility, remembering, self-care, and communication. And this is important because it recognizes that disability is at the intersection between the functional limitation in one of these domains that we can have and the barriers that exist in society and that prevent people from participating. So if we don't disaggregate data, if we don't collect this disaggregated data, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to tailor the activity to the needs. So identifying specific needs is a prerequisite to then being able to really design and implement truly inclusive activities. And it's also an obligation under international law. Of course, there are rules and regulation in every country that you have to be mindful of, but it's really important for evidence-based. And then the last part on inclusive practices is a sort of checklist with basically way you can use to, if you're a collection-based organization, to promote the professional development of your staff, organize training on the right of persons with disabilities, or play also a role in advocacy and awareness raising on these specific groups. and just a list of practices you can use. And the last thing I want to mention is that, of course, like the four groups that I mentioned, person with disability, minorities, LGBTI, women and girls, and displaced person, are not an exhaustive list of vulnerable and marginalized groups in society. There are more, especially when it comes to children. Children can be vulnerable because they live in rural areas, because they are unaccompanied or separated minors, because they are in street situations. And so because we couldn't really focus on all these groups, we focus on the four main ones. But at page 89 of the toolkit, you will find a general checklist. This is only the first part of the checklist that you see here, and it's truly focused on how you can, it's an overall checklist that is applicable to all the groups. And it's about, like, we want to promote a reflection on whether your organization is actually doing specific things in the area of data collection, data analysis, in the area of professional development, partnership, advocacy, awareness raising, and overall accessibility. So we think it's a very practical and hands-on checklist that can serve as a sort of self-assessment, and then based on the result, you can use the other parts of the toolkit to design relevant activities. So that's all, and then later on we will be open as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martina, Henry, for the presentation on the HRBA. My name is Lucas. I work for Thermos 98, which was the coordinator of the other toolkit that we are presenting today. I'm going to share my screen. You can see it, right? You can hear me and everything. Okay, thank you so much. So yes, this is Lucas. I work for Thermos 98, which was the coordinator of work package 3 within Towched. And I'm gonna introduce you shortly to one of the toolkits that we prepared in the project, which is called the Towched Kit of Creative Resources. And it's, okay, transitions. Nice transitions. It's basically a practical tool to support museums in developing education for sustainable development activities and workshops with youth and children in all their diversity while working with museums and learning communities. This is differently from the HRBA, which is addressed mostly or more prominently to institutions, to cultural institutions. The kit of creative resources is much more focused on articulating the relationship between the specific learning communities and the people working in museums to co-create learning activities. So it's much the approach is more narrow in that sense. It can only support these people in producing a learning itinerary that can be meaningful for them in trying to address ESD through the collections of museums. So basically, the four pillars, we could say, of the kit of creative resources are this: the education, obviously, education for sustainable development. Our goal is to empower learners to make informed choices to support, for example, environmental integrity, social justice, cultural diversity, and other things. It is, as the HRBA, it is really linked to SDGs, but instead of approaching the 17 SDGs, we are working also with the 8 ESD themes that are an abbreviated way of working with SDGs, actually. Another important thing to say about the kit is that it's also based on the human rights-based approach as an overall methodology underlying it somehow. As Henry presented before, the HRBA is based in different steps, and the kit is adapted to those steps to reflect and to work with human rights standards. So it's important to to acknowledge that the kit builds on top of the HRBA. It's also very important, or one of the core functioning principles of the kit, to say that it's about participation, it's about bringing in children and youth to museums and trying to invite them to co-create ESD activities with them on a horizontal basis through different kinds of levels of participation that I will go through later on in the presentation. And then obviously it is about heritage and the collections of museums as well. So putting all these things together in the cocktail will result in ESD activities that are hands-on, that are somehow service learning, that are trying to activate discussions and work around ESD through exploring the collections of different museums across Europe to learn, but also to experience different kinds of solutions in relation to those ESD themes. It's the kit. The idea is that a facilitator, that can be a museum worker, but also an educator or some other mediator figure, takes it, reads through it, and proposes a learning itinerary that adapts to the different needs that the learning communities, but also the kind of opportunities that the museum can offer. So the idea is that they can adapt the activities that they are producing. But if we have to say who is it for, we would say the end user is children and youth in all the diversity. But it's also for educators and for museum staff to work together to try to produce a meaningful educational activity together, and to go through it with different profiles, most prominently, obviously, children and youth, but also with artists, mediators, and other kinds of actors. It can be scientists, it can be researchers, different kinds of profiles. Probably also relevant to say that this kit has been developed as part of a series of activities that were called the Towched pilots, which were developed through the project in Work Package 3. And we worked with 9 different museums across Europe, actually in Latvia, 4 of them, and 5 of them in Spain. You have them listed there, all 9 museums that participated in the pilots, and the pilots were a way of, on the one hand, developing this kit together, but on the other, about introducing directly activities, ESD activities, in the context of museums by using different contemporary artistic practices to create reflections, ideas, tools connected to sustainable development, through the use of the framework of the HRBA that was presented right before. These are some random pictures of these pilots. It is very important to say that these activities were carried out with a group of co-facilitators that were crucial in the development of the kit, and we have them listed as authors at the end of this presentation, but also in the kit. So if you download it, you will see who they are. And yeah, the activities were quite diverse. They were very different from each other, and we had to acknowledge, or to work from the fact that the ESD activities couldn't be the same in every different context, because the collection of the museum was really different, but also the kind of groups that participated were really different from each other. I see a comment in the chat. Okay, thank you, Indra. So these facts, when we started working with this, and when we addressed the work of doing this kit, were really important, because they showed us that there are no universal way of addressing ESD, that they have to, each case has to be treated in a different way, acknowledging the kind of needs that participants have, the kind of wishes as well, what they want to learn, what they want to do, but also the kind of collections that the museum have, and the kind of challenges that they may face in their work. There are many learnings out of that process. And we are currently working in these case studies reports, which will be uploaded to the Towched website really soon. And each of them portrays what was done, what was learned, what were the results, so they can be somehow inspiring for other people to both to use the kit, but also to conduct more generally ESD activities in different contexts. Indra already shared the link to download the kit of creative resources, but you have it here as well. You can download either a digital version of it or a version to be printed. And when you download it, you will find like this, basically. You open it, you unzip it, and you find these four different kinds of resources. The first one is the facilitator's guide, which is basically an instructions document on how to use it. And there are some aspects probably relevant about this facilitator's guide, but about the kit in general, I would say. It is important to say that it is a preparatory tool. So we need, or you need, or anyone producing this kind of activities and addressing or using the kit will need to have a mediator or a facilitator that works with it, that reads it in detail and prepares the ESD activities before the start of the workshops that you will have. But also there are some other tools in it that can be used through the development of the workshops, especially in the third folder in additional materials. But it's important to acknowledge that it's a tool for you to get inspired and to prepare your ESD activities with museums and learning communities. The second relevant thing is that it's a very modular and flexible kind of resource, especially taking into account what I said before about the universal, the impossibility of having universal activities that work everywhere. So acknowledging that fact, acknowledging that we have, or that is addressed to groups of children from 6 to youth from that are 25 years old, but also taking into account that there are 8 ESD themes. So we had many different inputs in this kit, and we designed it to have it as modular, as flexible as possible. So you can, anyone using the kit can adapt it to their own needs as in an easy way, as easy as we could. We tried to make it as easy as we could. But nonetheless, it's something that it's important to say that it's supposed to be modular. So you don't have to follow it from the beginning to end. You can just take whatever pieces you find useful. It's also relevant to say that it's very much based in contextual, or very much listening to contextual aspects of the learning communities and the museums that are participating in these processes. So it's not about sharing something from someone to another person, but about building together the kind of context or the kind of situation that you want to address with the participants in the workshops. Then it's probably also worth mentioning that the kit is not aiming to replace the kind of educational activities that museums have. On the contrary, it's about building on top of those practices. So if a museum has an audio guide or a traditional guide or films or whatever, it's not about removing them to bringing these new kind of activities, but about having them and using them as a starting point to go towards other discussions that probably are not so new in the context of each museum and learning community, but that are nonetheless relevant. So this is important to say because we wanted to acknowledge from the beginning in Towched that the knowledge of the museums, the knowledge that they host, is organized in a specific way, and we shouldn't forget that. And then finally, in here, we have different levels of participation for youth and children, because we realized while conducting the pilots that the groups that hadn't participated before in co-creation activities found more difficulties in conducting them or in participating actively in them. So we finally included like three different levels of participation, from a participation that is more one way to a participation that is more like a co-creation, a partnership between children and youth with museum staff, with educators. If you go in the second folder here, so if you go in the second folder, when you download the kit, which is called Modules and Cards, you will find basically this. This is the way in which the different activities proposed are organized in the kit. There are 5 different modules, and each of them chronologically, so to say, develops into something that builds on the previous activities. So you have first learning about ESD, which is not only about learning in a theoretical way, but in a practical, hands-on way. Then you have exploring the museum and its collection, about getting to know what's there, what are the items, the objects that you can find in that museum, that specific museum. Then it's about co-creating the learning itinerary together. Once you know what ESD is, how does different ESD themes affect directly your life as a participant in the workshop, but also when you know what the collection is about. Then after the co-creation of the learning itinerary, we have the creative actions, which are very different in format, very different. They use different kinds of mediums. And then you have self-evaluation, reflection, and learnings activities, which are about participants getting to realize what they learned and trying to apply it on their day-to-day after the end of the workshop. It's also important or relevant to say that there are these are the 8 ESD themes, which are basically the same as the ones that you can find in the HRBA toolkit. And in the kit, additionally, you can also find some descriptions of these ESD themes, which are mostly for adults and facilitators to get to know what this is about, what topics can be addressed. It's not an exclusive list, but some of the topics that you can address through each of the ESD themes. And also it can be for older youth, so to say, participants that are getting closer to 25 years old. They can use these ESD theme cards because the younger participants will find language kind of difficult, and there are some other activities in the toolkit that they can use to get to know what cultural diversity and tolerance is, or climate change, or any of these topics. So I will go very quickly because I think we don't have much time through the 5 modules. Some of the activities that you can find there. The modules have like 6, 7, up to 10, I think, activities in each of them. And the idea is not for groups to do all of them, obviously, as you can imagine, but to pick those that are most relevant for your learning community. And this is one of my favorites in work in module 1, which is called Island of Wellbeing, and it was tested and tried in one of the pilots in Latvia, in the Eduard Weidenbaum's museum pilot. And it's about creating with different kinds of available organic materials to create islands that are representations for different participants of their idea of well-being, of a place that brings them comfort, rest, safety, places in which they feel safe. So that was a way of like working through a specific, through material things to reflect about what brings them comfort in relation to different ESD themes. So participants created these different islands, which are some of them, all of them actually are very beautiful. And this is a good activity for people to start to get into the topic, to start reflecting about what does it mean ESD actually, and how does it relate with your day-to-day life. Another activity that you can find in Module 1, and I will go very briefly through this, is a redefinition of those ESD theme cards that I explained just before, but for younger participants. So you have the 8 ESD themes and a set of questions that help them reflect about the different topics through their personal experience as children, basically. So if you go to the cultural diversity and tolerance discovery card, you will find questions as what makes you, your family, or friends special or different from others, and why is it good that people are different, for example. In the second module, in exploring the museum and its collection, there are different kinds of cards with different formats, different ways of addressing the way you get to know the collection in the museum. So this card is about listening to the museum, to try to have a sensory experience around how the museum sounds and get to know the museum through sound. But you can find other activities like a treasure hunt, or walks, or different kinds of activities. The third module, the co-creation of the learning itinerary, hosts also different kinds of cards, and in relation with the 3 levels of participation that I mentioned before, the guided participation is probably for younger participants, and it has different moments of consultation for participants on what they want to do, but it's the level of participation of co-creation is restricted and is smaller than the other 2. The second one is collaborative consultation, and it's about checking constantly with participants what they want to do, what they would like to do. And the third one, like the top, so to say, level of participation, is a co-creation partnership in which children and youth co-create in equal terms with museum staff, with facilitators, with educators, and whoever is participating in the workshops. There are 6-7 activities in this module. One of them is this idea of speed dating co-creation, in which participants share different ideas in a setting in which they are changing the people they are talking to every 3 minutes. And then there is also an activity which is called How to Design a Workshop, in which we specifically ask participants to fill in a form to share ideas on what they would like to do. And then that's collected by the facilitator and introduced in the following steps, like, for example, this one. The fourth module, the creative actions, has like 10 activities, I think, about using different mediums to have creative actions in the context of museums, and this is one of them. This is one of them that was tested in the pilot that we conducted in the Museum of Contemporary Arts in Genalhuacil, in the south of Spain, in Andalusia, and it's called Our Flag. It's about creating a symbolic element, a flag, to protect participants about an issue related to an ESD theme that can be a challenge for them. So in this case, in Genalhuacil, this is a very small town in the middle of a forest, and there was like a few years ago, there was a fire in the forest. So very little children like this were very frightened about the fire. And that's something that is in their memories. So they worked with this idea of creating a flag that symbolically protects them from the fire. And in the process of doing that, they also learned about environmental sustainability, about climate change, and about all these ESD themes that we have listed before. The final result was something like this, and they paraded the flag through the town. Then finally, getting to the end of it, of the modules, we thought that it was really important to also have self-evaluation, reflection, and learnings activities. One of them is creating a museum fair that also serves as a final presentation of results, in which children and youth go through the different parts of the museum, sharing the collection with the audience, with the people that is there for the presentation. Another activity is a time capsule, which is about putting some of the items that were produced in the context of these activities in a capsule and burying it somewhere. So it symbolically is preserved for the future. In the third folder, sorry, we have additional materials with kind of resources that you can use through the workshops. Like, for example, if you are doing a treasure hunt, there you will find a sheet, a template for the treasure hunt, like with hints for them to look for the items in the collection that they have to find and fill in some information about them and relate them to ESD topics. And then in the fourth document in the folder, which is called Making the Kit Your Own, is something similar to what Martina shared in relation to the HRBA and inclusion. It's a document that helps facilitators to tailor their activities, to go through the kit and tailor their activities in the most meaningful way for the different participants, for the museum that they are working with. And the document has mainly 3 different things. The first one is some guidelines for inclusivity, which also has a checklist. This is much more about the specific groups with whom you are working. So there are some ideas there, or some topics that you should bear in mind when you are working with different kinds of participants, like, for example, facilitating that the group you are working with can achieve the learning goals in different ways, not just like through an only one mechanism, but through different kinds of activities as well. That, for example, participants can relate with the activities through different sensory channels and communication modes. So it's one of the things that we realized is that if we only activities, those visually impaired people will find difficulties in participating in any of these activities. So you have to facilitate, or facilitators have to facilitate the way or the kind of mediums, channels that participants have to use to fulfill their activities. So there are some ideas there, and in the document you will find a few pages about how to adapt your activities for different kinds of impairments. Then another important activity is or another important resource is this educators and museum staff methodology, which is about putting together educators and museum staff at the beginning of the process to kind of co-create or kind of co-designing the activities together, because we realized that normally the kind of activities that museums have are already given to educators as such, and that conversation was really useful to shape what could come out of each different workshop. And then the icebreakers, which are very simple activities to engage participants when you feel like the energy of the group is low, or when you want to introduce them to a different group of people or something like that. That's basically the kit. It has many resources in it, and it has been developed and tested in 9 different pilots. So we think it was kind of useful, and we hope it's useful from now on as well. There were many authors, as you can see there, which mostly were the facilitators in the different pilots, but also myself, also and Alba the graphic designer that made everything beautiful. Then it's also important to acknowledge the contribution of the pilot coordinators, the Latvian Museum Association and the University of Valencia, alongside with Themos 98, the schools, the museums, and obviously, and very importantly, the partners in the consortium. So I think that's it from my side. I hope it wasn't too long. But if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them as well.
Great. Okay, so thank you both. Thank you, Martina, Henry, and Lucas, for explaining the toolkits. I think that they are a very valuable resource for everyone. So in case anyone in the chat has any questions, you can write it or you can raise your hand. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you, as Lucas was saying, we tested these methodologies and these tools within the pilots, which was a central part of our work in Towched for the last few months. And I wanted to ask you regarding both toolkits, so for the both toolkits, which were like the major changes that you have to do to adapt them while testing them in the pilots, which things didn't seem to work at first, or which necessities that you didn't really think about or anticipated you had to really change to make it more applicable to other cases. Yeah.
I'm happy to go first, just to say that because the way the human rights-based approach toolkit was developed kind of alongside the pilots. So it was some of the training and capacity building activities we'd been doing with the Towched partners from the outset of the project, they went into the toolkit. But then through some consultation before last Christmas with the pilot coordinators and the pilots around what would work and what would not work, and that was really helpful, and that informed, like for instance, the case study, the in-practice examples that we have in the toolkit. So the illustrated examples that I gave you, the suggestions for them came from our Towched partners, and that was really helpful.
Yeah, I can go on now. So I didn't explain this before, but the kit was developed like in two different phases. There was a prototype version of it, the first version at the beginning of the pilots, and then we refined it and changed it very significantly by the end of the piloting process. And we learned a lot actually through it, because there were several things that we didn't account for at the beginning. So for example, one of the things that I was saying before was this fact that we didn't think that even if we tried to be as inclusive as possible while developing the kit, we didn't realize that most of the activities that were present in the first version of the kit were based on visual kind of input. So that was something really important that we realized, that we had to adapt or to offer a variety of activities, engage in different kinds of senses. But also we realized that, for example, there were some ideas or some limitations or challenges in the way that we address our work with museums. Yeah, very openly speaking. Many of them, we were working with public institutions, and many of them are underfunded. They have many educational activities, and engaging with something like this is always challenging. So we had to rely a lot on their generosity, and it was really important. But at the same time, we had to make the learning curve had to be less steep when working with the kit. So we tried to facilitate it as much as possible in the second version. And hopefully this is easier for museums to engage with in the future. there were some other things, like some ideas. For example, activities worked well when they engaged humor. They worked better. It was also important to acknowledge that ESD activities have to work from a holistic perspective, that you cannot like have different kinds of activities in different days that are not connected with each other. There are some kinds of different kinds of things, and there's a document that we can share as well with learnings from that redesigning of the kit.
Hi, thank you both. And actually, I have a question in that line that you, Lucas, and you were saying, and actually, this is also a question for you both. Like, how, I mean, what are the common mistakes that museums do to make people feel a little bit excluded without wanting them? And also, but on the other side, how can we make all these types of different collections to get people excited about these super complicated topics? Because in the end, these are like somehow really complicated topics. So how can we make them like get super excited? All the people included, like from museums to educators, and especially children and the youth in all their diversities. So I think this is for both of you. So I don't know who wants to go to jump in. I think I see Henry.
Yeah, I'll jump in and I'll answer the second one that you raised, Mar, about how do we get people excited about these things that can seem really complicated. For me, like when we work from the people-centered approach, is accepting that people have their own interests, their own ideas, their own things that they want to do, and we start from that really. Like, what is it that people want to do? So rather than us assuming that it's like a kind of like say a kind of conveyor belt where the museum will come up with an idea that will then develop a program, and then people are somehow just at the end of that conveyor belt. It's a bit different. We have to listen. We have to spend a lot more time listening, and to make sure, like when Martina spoke about the triple AQ framework, is an absolutely fantastic one. How do we make sure that what we do is appropriate and accessible and inclusive, and also that it is good quality? Like, how do we make sure that people have opportunities to take part that are meaningful to them? Meaningful in terms of the things that they're interested in, their hopes, concerns, ideas for the future, what they want the world to be like, how they want to work with other people, and how can collections facilitate all of that. That's the way that I would answer it, I think.
And me too. So thank you, Henry, for answering for me as well. Yes, it's about bringing to earth the different topics, I guess. For us, it was when we worked with theoretical approaches of the ESD in some pilots, it worked worse than when we worked with an ESD theme and related it very closely with the day-to-day experiences of participants. So that was, in those cases, it worked really well. I don't remember the first question, Mar, which one? What was it?
Like, how can we make people do not feel excluded from the museums? And I think it was related to what you were previously saying.
Yeah. Yes. It's, I mean, it's a very broad question. It's from our personal perspective, it's or how we try to answer it through the kit specifically was with this initial methodology in which we put together educators and museum staff to work together and to try to facilitate or make easier the transition or the space for children and youth to be in the museum. So it's about trying to introduce them to those spaces that are usually very hostile somehow, not hostile very hostile, but they are not very welcoming for children and youth normally, some museums at least. So this preparatory phase with educators and museum staff both helped educators to frame the participation of children and youth in the museum in a specific way for participants. But at the same time, it helped museum staff to get to know the needs of those groups and to facilitate as much as possible the access, both in a material and immaterial way, to the infrastructures of the museum. So I don't know if that answers your question, which is very complex and difficult to answer,
Indeed,
at least for me.
yeah, indeed. And I think even for us from the museum world, because we have like so many different types of collections and situations. We have actually one question in the chat. So it says like, if a library or a museum has a very tight budget, can they still use these tools effectively, or do they require a lot of resources to implement? And I think this is like, oof, the tricky question. So do we made anything nice in Touch, accessible? So Henry, Lucas.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll just to keep going with this. That I mean, the human rights-based approach and education for sustainable development are not really about more work or additional work. They're about a different way of approaching our work as it is. And so, but to build on that, the toolkit, certainly the HRBA toolkit, and I'm sure I know the youth toolkit as well, is they're written to be practical. So they are supposed to be supportive. If people want to do this work, then they will definitely find it of interest and use. A lot of the tools that are in the toolkit, the HRBA toolkit, they could be done in a really short way. Some of them are activities that could be done in half an hour. You know, it's really to help you. It's of course is accepting that museums, libraries, other cultural institutions, they are also really different from one another. So the challenges of a small one are really different from the challenges of a big one, but they both have challenges. And so the toolkit should be of use to someone in an institution of any size. And even if you have no budget and if you only have half an hour, there should be something in it to help you. And we would love to know how you make use of it.
Yes, completely agree. Also, probably important to mention that all the activities that are there can be done without major investment. So they are designed to be done with little resources, basically printed paper and some other small, easy things to find in the context of a museum.
Thank you. Does anyone has any other question? I don't know, Indra, here, do you have any other? Or in the chat, anyone? If not, I think we can close. So I think it has been already 1 hour and so I want to thank everyone for their time, because 1 hour and so on a Monday morning, it's probably a lot. But thank you to our panelists, and thank you everyone for being here. This is going to be uploaded in our YouTube channel so everyone can have access. And yeah, we are going to keep going and spread the word and keep going doing some webinars. So stay tuned, because we are going to share any other news soon. And especially thank you to Lucas, Henry, and Martina that she had to leave. So thank you everyone, and see you soon from the Towched project. Have a nice week.